Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day number 2 of week number 6 of the Beyond Pulse Coach Education webinar series. Day number 2, but Thursday. Obviously, we had a little hiatus earlier in the week, but absolutely delighted to be able to pick things back up again today. And welcome personally a very good friend and somebody that I'm super excited to be able to share his insight into what is quite a unique part of the game with you all today, Mr. Oliver Gage. Ollie will be able to give a little bit more of a detailed background on himself and his quite intriguing career throughout the soccer football landscape momentarily. And obviously I have Mr. Mark Wilson alongside me as well. So thank you, listeners that are here with us live. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing us or for your dose of daily education. For everybody catching on demand, obviously thank you too for tuning in a little bit later on. Before we start, just want to call your attention, coaches on the line. Beyond Pulse did launch our Active Minutes project, and we're blasting that out again across social media channels as of tomorrow with the support of Nike Soccer. So please stay tuned for that if you're looking for ways to help inspire your players to be owning their lockdown, owning their development while at home during these tough times. So www.beyondpulse.com for more information there. But moving back into today and obviously our special guest, Ollie, thank you so much for freeing up an hour of your time to join us today. If you could, mate, for people that are perhaps a little less familiar with you, please just provide a brief background into your history, where you got to, or how you got to where you are today in the cold Canada.
Well, first of all, hi Tom, thanks for having me. Yes, we do go way back, which is something I'll probably talk about a little bit later on. But for now, we'll leave that part of things. I started off as an analyst intern at Sheffield Wednesday way back when, probably about 10 years ago now. Finished university in the States. I came out as a player on a scholarship, returned to the UK to my hometown of Sheffield, where I picked up a role as an intern at Sheffield Wednesday. I was doing some very, very kind of basic generic things, clipping some set pieces, hitting a button on a laptop every time a player on loan touched the ball, so a coach didn't have to go through the whole game and he could review his clips. Very kind of grunt work type analysis stuff as a way of getting into the industry. I then decided to move back to America and try and make a go of a life out here. I moved to DC for 6 months on a coaching contract on a H-2B visa. Very standard under 14s girls and boys team travel, regular coach, and I was very lucky that a job came up at the University of Virginia. It was a very unique job at the time. It was an operations assistant role, so technically no coaching on field, but they saw it very much as an analyst role. So I think I was actually the first ever performance analyst, as you'd call them, in college soccer. It's a role that I know 10, 15, 20 colleges maybe have got now. And after a couple of years there, we did really well, had a lot of success. We won a national championship, which was great. I got offered a job with Houston Dynamo in MLS. So I moved to Houston, got sunburned a bunch of times, had a lot of fun. Obviously working in MLS was excellent. It was a really great experience. I ended up moving more into strategic planning, recruitment, stuff like that towards the end of my time. And then about 18 months ago now, I got approached by the Canadian Premier League to come and join them in the project up here. I'm now in Toronto and being part of launching a brand new league. So my job entails anything from working with the clubs on their analysis processes, how do they use data better to inform coaching decisions, all the way through to strategic player recruitment, so helping them find the right type of players for what we want to do as a league. So multifaceted at the moment. I'm wearing a lot of hats, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, perfect. And I think, mate, you've provided a very humble explanation of your journey. I think you very swiftly touched upon the fact that you were probably the first of your kind in the US, at least on the college soccer scene. And when I speak of the work that you're doing to friends or to staff, it's really that I think you were a pioneer in this space, in all honesty, for at least this side of the Atlantic. So for people listening, obviously Ollie's given you a snapshot, and we'll obviously dive more into his background, but the role that you then took at Houston, and you've seen you've seen how other people have followed suit, and how other clubs have tried to replicate the idea that you had at Houston, and obviously at Virginia when you won the national championship. So yeah, guys, we're in for a treat today, and yeah, thank you obviously so much for being here and sharing that little intro. What I'd like to do now, just before we get into the conversation a little more broadly, is ask you this. Because performance analysis, game analysis, video analysis, whatever the buzzwords are that you want to kind of use to describe the industry and space that you operate in, obviously you entered at a time where it wasn't as widely used as it is today, and as widely utilized both by academy programs and first team programs as perhaps it is now. But can you speak to five influential people across this journey that have supported your development, and specifically your career progression, coming from a guy like maybe many on the call who started just as an aspirational youth coach in the US to obviously where you are now?
Yeah, obviously it goes without saying, and it's a little bit of a cliche, there's an awful lot of people that help you get to where you are, and and all that type of stuff. There's more than five for sure. I think it takes an awful lot of good people to work in 4 or 5 different jobs now and have a positive experience in all of them. I'd say, first of all, like absolutely the most important person for different reasons was George Gelnovach, the head coach of the University of Virginia. Not just for giving me a chance. The fact that a college program at the time was looking to hire an analyst shows kind of a forward thinking and innovative approach from them, but just the way he encouraged me to speak openly, to bring a new aspect to the program, the way he kind of reinforced things with me. If I came to him with an insight or a piece of advice from my side, I don't think in one time in my time at Virginia I heard "no, you're wrong" or "no" in that context. He trusted me at the time as someone who knew more than him about this field, so I could definitely go to him and say, "Hey, this is going on. I think we should do this," and he would take it in and say, "I understand, but we're not going to do that because of this." It's not like everything I said he just did. But absolutely kind of the open-mindedness and the willingness of a national championship winning coach before I got there, and someone that had coached in the World Cup quarterfinal with the USA and stuff like that, to listen to a 23, 24-year-old kid saying, "Hey, the data says we're shooting from this location, or we're doing that too much." So the way he just kind of encouraged me and let me own it, such a big, important program in US college soccer, I think developed me incredibly quickly. And that's one piece of advice I give to all aspiring analysts is, sometimes you'll speak to someone who, a lot like me, is an intern at a club, and they're clipping set pieces or doing menial tasks, and they say, "How do I do more? How do I get better?" And one thing I always say is you've got to be in charge of something on your own. It doesn't matter if it's, the local under 12s, whatever team in the 8th division, it does not matter. But until you own something for yourself and you're not kind of guided or kind of protected by a boss, that's when you're really going to develop. So George was unbelievable, and probably the first figure in my career that really, really pushed me forward. And I push a lot of coaches to him these days and advise people that if you want to try and get in somewhere, Virginia's a place that you will be respected and you will learn quickly. And then, the periphery staff at Virginia, I say periphery, assistant coaches aren't exactly periphery, but they're not the head. So Matt Chulis, Terry Boss, Mike Bohonic, they were excellent too, from a young lad that at the time I'd been in America, but only as a college student, so very kind of shielded life out here. on campus, drinking at parties, all the usual stuff. But I didn't know how to set up a phone account because I went to Best Buy and bought a pay-as-you-go phone. I didn't know how to do banking properly. All these like things that you don't think of, like life guidance there, along with the soccer. The assistant coaches at Virginia were great too. It was an unbelievable program, considering how much of a big machine it is. The kind of community feel there and the way they do things, they definitely do it the right way. So then I moved to Houston Dynamo, and to be quite honest, my first year or so at Houston was really tough. I was guilty of underestimating the difficulty of life in MLS. So the analysis side of things was fine, it kind of look after itself a little bit, but the travel is something that you'll never experience in your life. So 38 games a year, the away games, every trip is a 3 or 4 day trip. You do that every other week. It takes a lot of toll on you personally. It's a really, really tough life. And when you're also in a position which is kind of a supporting position, it was at the time, you weren't getting paid an awful lot of money in terms of like compared to everybody else. So the other coaches were on contracts where their wives didn't have to work, or because they were bringing home enough for the both of them, and they could just worry on their focus on their personal life. Whereas me and my wife, we both had to work. She was 9 through 5, and I was on the road all the time with Houston. So it made things really, really difficult my first year. And then Wade Barrett came in as the interim assistant coach when the head coach left. He was a Dynamo legend, really good player, and an unbelievable human being. And I think he spotted a little bit that I was struggling on a personal level. At work it was fine. I think I was doing a good job, but personally I was really, really struggling with the trials and tribulations of being on the road all the time. And that didn't change, but he really embraced, a lot like George, kind of empowered me, embraced the work, gave me a lot more of a voice at the club, and kind of pushed a lot of my work towards the key decision makers there. And that really helped me. I'm someone who takes pride in my work, but also I'm guilty of taking it home with me a lot of the time. So when work's not going well, life isn't going well for me. And then on the other side of things, Paul Caffrey and Paul Rogers there, they're still the goalkeeper coach and the strength and conditioning coach there. They taught me about kind of the realities of professional football. So a lot of things that are probably what you'd call the ugly side of the game, like knowing when to bite your tongue because it might actually save your job down the line, manipulating in the right way certain players because you're not going to get through to them. You're not going to sit down with certain players and teach them about an aspect of the game because, to be quite honest, they're arrogant, and they're the best. They've always been the best. So kind of almost like the dark side of the game, almost. They taught me how to be a bit more streetwise. We still talk to this day, great friends. And then in my new role, my boss, it's a little bit of a cliche mentioning your current boss, right? I'm asking for a pay raise next week. But my boss now, James Easton, really, really creative, innovative thinker. So I actually met him on an away trip with the Dynamo. We had a free afternoon, and he'd already spoke to me about joining the CPL. We were in Portland at the time. He flew up from LA. We met in the airport, and straight away we just kind of clicked. The way he thinks about the game, everything he thinks about is pretty much outside the box. So if it's been done before, he pretty much doesn't want to know about it. Or if if it's only just come out, he'll look at it. But if it's the way that everything's always been done, not really got too much interest in doing that. He's not afraid to be different in the good way. Really, really good, innovative, open-minded thinker, and a smart businessman. Obviously now working at the league level, I'm in meetings sometimes with the owners of all the clubs or commissioners and people that do TV deals and things like that. So teaching me a little bit more about the business aspect of it and the other side of the game that sometimes people don't see. And just you see professional sport, a lot of people focus on the players and the coaches and stuff, which is it's understandable and it's right, but there's also the whole thing's generally financed by a businessman somewhere and just teaching me a little bit about that side of the game. So someone's been important everywhere I've been, really. So been very lucky, like I said.
Yeah, I'll forgive the fact that there wasn't 5 names there for the quality of the stories. So I think.
Okay, well, you get half a point for when I mentioned 2 or 3 people at the same time, right? I was thinking.
Mate, that works just fine. No, I think it's fascinating insight for people listening, just to try and understand. You mentioned like multifaceted approaches and the different hats that you have to wear, and even in that conversation, while we're obviously gonna talk about, you know, the applicability of video analysis, game analysis, the fact that, you know, you've spoken to having to balance personal, both life off the field with work on the field, but also, you know, the personal relationships with players to facilitate buy-in, you know, understand staff. And we actually had a good friend of yours as well, Steve Fell, on the line yesterday, who was speaking of that time on the road as well. So obviously you know, we've used this, and I find myself touching upon it almost every day, but the iceberg effect of people see you and in the MLS and the glitz and the glamour and the bright lights, but actually the work that goes into getting there and staying there and being a success of those at those levels, there's obviously, you know, there's a deep history to it. So thank you for the honest account, mate. We will now, obviously, people tuned in to speak analysis work, so we're going to go in that direction. Ollie, if you could, just as a starting point, can you sum up or try to explain to me what video or performance analysis means to you, and candidly, you know, what you're trying to achieve through its use in a soccer environment?
Yeah, sure. So you kind of split them almost in two. So video, there's an aspect of video in performance analysis for sure, and there can be an aspect of analyzing a performance with video. You see an awful lot of things these days, I do, you know, on Twitter, where you see accounts that are breaking down passes between lines and shape and stuff like that, and there's rings around the players, and there's a light coming down from a UFO in the sky highlighting them, and they're moving around, and they're talking, you know, it's showing Barcelona manipulating space somewhere on overloading the wide area, and it looks really good, and there's nothing wrong with it, I don't think, but there's also an aspect of, I don't think that's necessarily analyzing a performance, right? That's analyzing a moment. So I always say to people, that clip's 30 seconds and it's, you know, Barcelona breaking lines with passes. But does that tell you if Barcelona played well that day? Or does it tell you what they did well to win that game? You know, if they result in a goal, it might be this is a key moment for sure. But I don't think it really tells whether or not you played well that day, or measures a performance and gives you any real insight as a coach about what you should do in training the next week. So if that's something that Barcelona, for example, really wanted to drive home, and like that was their key to winning this game, and that was the one incident out of 15 times they tried it that it actually worked, you know, you might go back to the drawing board on a Monday morning and be like, we need to work on this again, because we actually only were successful one time in 15 at doing this. But on Twitter or wherever, you know, they highlight it, and you know, as far as you know, Barcelona kind of are the best team in the world. But you know, you get what I'm saying. It doesn't really, it's not very indicative of how a performance is. But video analysis in individual moments is also important in its own bubble. And it's the same with performance analysis. So I see it as, you know, the keys in the name. It is literally analyzing a performance and breaking it down into sections to measure whether or not you played well or you achieved your targets in certain areas. So something I talk about a lot is something called the misinformation effect. And essentially, the human brain after a game can remember accurately between 35 and 45% of what actually happened. So there was a couple of studies done, but a very high profile one. It pooled Premier League managers after games, had Mourinho, Alex Ferguson, like all the big names took part in it. And their accurate recall immediately following a game was, again, between 35 and 45%. And what the human brain does is, instead of kind of not remembering something, it essentially makes it up and assumes some stuff, and that gets influenced by conversations after games, social media, like whatever it is. So as a coach, if you're then going in on Monday morning or Sunday afternoon after a Saturday game and deciding what you thought of the game, the chances are more than 50% of what you're remembering is inaccurate. So performance analysis is essentially building a framework or a set of measurements around a performance and having a more accurate way of deciding whether or not you played well in certain areas and you hit your targets.
Thank you for that, mate. I think it's obviously the way that you explain it, it's so important. And that buy-in, all were there any barriers to entry that you had to overcome? So obviously, you know, I guess why did this intrigue you? Why did you go down this route? But when you did, speaking to the fact that maybe coaches, I don't think, you know, I put my coaching hat on, I probably don't want to be told that half of what I record is wrong, right? I think there's probably, I can only assume that there may be kind of a defensive, you know, retaliation, you know, conversations. No, not me. You know, I'm different. Can you speak to how you managed to overcome maybe those barriers to entry and how you maybe diffused some of that tension that was probably there? And were there any tips or techniques that you used to kind of emphasize the importance of this stuff to the staff? Go with there, and then we'll move on to the
I get you. Yeah. So yeah, there's one coach in particular in my time. I'm not going to name names or anything. There's one coach I really struggled with in my time. Found it really tough to get anything through to him. You know, there was one time we were playing a game against like Colorado Rapids or someone like that, and in the literally half an hour before kickoff, we were sat in the coach's changing room. The guys were outside on the, not half an hour because the guys will be warming up, probably an hour and a half before kickoff. We were sat in the coach's training room, and one of the assistant coaches was looking at a report I prepared that they'd all seen, you know, a couple of days before. And he was like, "Oh, I didn't notice that. These have conceded the most shots in the league out of any team all year." And the head coach, and this kind of sums up the whole relationship with this guy, the head coach was like, "I don't believe that." Like, you're like, "Well, what do you mean you don't believe it?" I didn't. I just sat there and like, because at this point, to be quite honest, quite unfortunately, the relationship had almost completely broken down at this point. It was one of the most regretful things in my career. He just said, "All this stats mumbo jumbo is a load of bullshit. Like, I don't believe that. It's probably not right." And, you know, like when someone's kind of dismissing how many shots a team has conceded in a year compared to everyone else, and this is stuff that's, you know, recorded by reputable companies and it's on TV and stuff, like at that point it's really difficult. It's something I'd done at Virginia before. We were messing around after training, we're having a staff game or something, and we ended up, somehow someone mentioned expected goals, which is a stat that you know, it's getting a bigger reputation in the game. Even at the youth level, people are starting to understand it and use it now. And again, he started going off about how it was all a load of shit, basically. Excuse my French if you want me to stop talking like this, but we're all coaches here. I challenged him to, he was a striker, he was a very good player. I challenged him to basically like a tournament, like me and you shooting from the edge of the box against a goalkeeper. Let's see who wins, you know. And he's like a very good professional striker in his day, like hands down, should have won, did win. But after one shot, I'd scored and he'd missed. And I went kind of like, okay, well, like we both know I'm the better player now. And like playing to his ego a little bit, you know, he got a bit riled up, and I was like, we might as well just cancel it now. I'm going to score 10 out of 10 and you're going to score none. And he's like, oh, he started going off about how, you know, how good he was basically as a player. And I said, well, that's exactly what expected goals is, right? Over one shot, I can be better than you from here. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to score every single time I take a shot from here. And that doesn't mean that you're going to miss every single time. Over 100 shots, you're going to beat me and you're going to score 10 goals or whatever it is, and I'm only going to score 5. And that's how we measure expected goals, is you look at the value of where you shoot from, and over a massive amount of games and shots, we can start to figure out how dangerous this type of shot is. And the penny dropped a little bit with him then, and he kind of got it a little bit, you know. And for the next few weeks, he was a lot better with me and like listened to me a little bit more and stuff like that. But it's more kind of indicative of a bigger picture, which is with all this stuff, there's going to be, you're essentially challenging opinions a lot of the time. You know, you're presenting, even though you're presenting evidence, like true facts, it still often goes against what coaches believe in their gut. So you have to be personable. You have to find a way to relate to people. But more than anything, I think you have to make sure it isn't personal. So clarity of conversations on the front end is essential, right? So if I'm building out, like, say the team has a way they want to play, like a game model or a playing philosophy, and I'm trying to build out a way we might be able to measure that, it's really important to me that you go to the coach and you explain how you're going to measure it, and maybe give a couple of examples. Because then on the back end, when you say something that they don't believe, they understand that there's a genuine process there that they've even been a part of to build that measurement. So you even let them kind of name the metrics. Something I picked up of a guy at Toronto FC, actually, who's very, very good, is, you know, we might have a metric. We have a metric for pressing called PPDA, which essentially measures how many passes the opposition make in their own half before we win the ball. So we call it PPDA in my field. But if you put PPDA on a post-game report or whatever, it looks very statty. You know, it looks hard for a regular coach to kind of understand, and then you get into the whole, oh, it's all for nerds and all this stuff. But if you just kind of let them name it, like whatever they want to name it, you tell them what it is, you show them, and you let them name it themselves, and then that goes on a report, or that's the language you use in a conversation, it becomes much, much easier for the coaches to kind of buy into it and understand, especially if it's their words and their phrase that they coined. So it's about being personable and understanding relationships. And like a lot of things in life, right, you can be, Steve was on yesterday, right? He was my roommate at Houston, actually a fitness coach. He's excellent. He's very personable. He's great with the players. It's about, you can be the best practitioner in the world in your field. You can have an unbelievable amount of knowledge, but if you don't have a way to get that knowledge across to people who don't understand it as well, like, you might as well just not have it. So it's just about building personal relationships and finding a way to get stuff like that across. I'm very lucky because I wasn't a pro. I wasn't that close to being a pro, but I was a semi-pro player and I played at college. So there's a base level of respect there from coaches that they know you, at least you've played a bit and you get it, sort of thing.
Well,
Just a quick point. I mean, I'm a huge advocate, Ollie, of game analysis, and I think it brought a level of consistency to my performance in my later years, especially when not only was I able to look at my moments of success and moments where I needed to improve, it was the link between what I saw in the video analysis to the plan that was put in place from the manager to help me improve on those things. If I look at my lack of awareness in the final third of checking my shoulder or receiving the ball and trying to play passes that break lines into the box, if I see it on a video, but there's no plan in place for me to improve that out on the training pitch, I'm not just automatically going to make better decisions without actually having a plan in place. And I just want to ask you how you've worked with coaches in the past and players to build that bridge of not just seeing it visually and then training carrying on as normal, but how do you put in those key learning blocks for players to then have success once they've analyzed their performance?
Yeah, it's a really important aspect of for individual player development. I think it's a really, really important aspect of it. And actually, we didn't set this up. I'm glad you asked that, because it actually leads quite well into like one of my most favorite examples of how I've done this with a player in the past. So we bought Albert Ellis, Honduran international at Houston. We bought him from Monterrey in Mexico for about $4 million. Right winger, unbelievably quick, probably the fastest player in MLS, like a very raw, athletic right winger who wasn't technically that great and didn't have great decision making. And essentially, what happened was, again, in a game against Orlando fairly early on in his time at Houston, he scored a goal from the edge of the box that came from a goalkeeping mistake. So he took a shot from he was on the right wing, so the top left corner of the box, like right on the corner, and the ball went in at the near post under the goalkeeper's body. And for the rest of that season, he took about 25 shots from that, almost the exact same location. He did the same thing: dribble, head down, shoot as hard as you can, and none of them went in. You know, they went off target, easy saves, like whatever, no more goals. And this was becoming a real issue because talking about expected goals, I know that that's not a particularly great place to be shooting from, and it's a low percentage opportunity. So off season, actually, we sat down with him. I presented this to the head coach and a couple of the other coaches, what I wanted to do, and they said, yeah, go do it. I sat down with him and I made him watch every single one of these shots and basically talk about whether or not, before he hit the ball, whether or not he thought he was going to score from shooting from there. And obviously, like all of them, he pretty much said no. And then I went a stage further and made him make his own shot map. So I printed off a piece of paper with like a penalty box and then another 10 yards, like an A4 sheet of paper. And I gave him a bunch of stickers from Walmart, like red and green stickers. And I just put like, every time you score, put a green sticker where you shot from, and every time you miss, put a red sticker. So he made his own shot map, like you see on Twitter or wherever. And then we pretty soon started realizing that he scored goals from central in front of the goal, and he took a ton of shots from everywhere else and missed all the time. So to take that a step further, we then set him some targets and said, okay, for next year, we want you to take only 50% of your shots from outside of this kind of zone in front of the box. That's your target. We don't care how many shots you take or whatever, but you should only be taking about half of your shots from outside of this zone. And then on the training field, we reinforced it. We had him do drills where, instead of shooting from there, he'd touch it past the defender and hit a low cross, or he'd take it another 3-4 yards into the box and shoot from closer. And he added 4 goals and 4 assists to his game the next year in almost an identical amount of minutes, and he was named in the MLS All-Star team. But that started with obviously identifying a target and a problem, setting him some personal goals, and then working on that decision-making process in training and reinforcing it. So even after certain games, I'd sit with him or talk about an individual shot and say, like, this is good, this is what we talked about, and just keep reinforcing it through the year. It made a huge difference to him.
It's a fascinating story, mate. And I think there's a tie in there to where we were on the last conversation about success facilitating or increasing buy-in as well, right? So clearly when a player experiences an increase in performance based upon any type of coaching advice or feedback, just human nature is they're more likely to listen and be receptive, but similarly to head coaches as well. So what I loved on your previous answer about the importance of being personable, I'm glad that Willow, you've asked that from an individual perspective. I was going to layer it all into a team question. If you could speak specifically on the set play goals at Virginia that obviously helped you to a national championship, and how identifying trends and weaknesses and investing the time to go in and use video to support tactical approaches in games, how that has been, hugely impactful to your career and the success of the teams that you've worked with as well.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like, success breeds buy-in. There's no doubt about it. And one big thing that happened quite early on in my time at Virginia was basically we were breaking down some opposition film, looking at Duke, I think it was. It was probably 3-4 games into my time at Virginia, and I highlighted what I thought was a weakness in there, the way they defend corners. We designed a short corner and that would eventually get worked to the back post, but taking the corner short meant the man on the back post went to the front post as the guy from the front post went to close down the short corner. So we showed the players this, and I kind of owned the presentation a little bit, like I took over the presentation for that set piece module of it. And we scored from it in the game. We won the game 1-0 or 2-1 or whatever. We scored from that, and then from that moment onwards, I think the players suddenly realized that they had something here that they could rely on, and when I did present stuff, it was worthwhile and really helped with that. And the personability comes into it too, right? You connect, you bond with the players. But then heading into the second year, I did a big presentation on basically we were crossing the ball too much. We were a bit wasteful with our attacking play in the final third. Did a big presentation on kind of limiting crossing and some other like data analytics stuff. And the players all bought in. We set them targets. We pinned like pre-game objectives onto the dressing room wall. And afterwards, a lot of the time we'd have like a post-game review, and they would like tick them off, and we had prizes sometimes if they met all their targets in a game and stuff like that. And I always say the national championship we won at Virginia, George says it himself, it was miles away from the most talented team they had technically, but it was the most mentally strong and the most professional ready team he'd ever coached. And we basically were smarter and kind of a bit more efficient with our decision making as a team. We played UCLA in the final, who now they've got probably 4 or 5 players from that team that are playing professionally somewhere. And technically they were miles ahead of us. Like we basically sat deep, bunkered and countered them and navigated the game the best we could. We won on penalties in the end, but if we'd have gone toe to toe with them, they would have beaten us. But we wouldn't have been able to do it without getting buy-in from the group, and it all stems from, like you said, positive experiences.
Yes, look, it's fascinating stories, and I asked Ollie to share, just for the listeners, for the benefit of seeing the effect that really the hard work and the very intentional approach to detail and game prep. It's not luck, right, that's kind of led you into those situations. It's not luck that's helped you adjust tactics. And we're going to build. I've got one question on trends, and then we're going to build into obviously the application of evidence-based game models. So when the coaches are sat on the line thinking, well, this is surely how to play because this is the most impactful way to do it. You've spoken about expected goals already. You've spoken about minimizing crosses. So my question to you is firstly, are there any other trends that you can kind of speak to that you've come across in the last kind of 3 to 5 years as the game is evolving? And then off the back of that, we'll talk about the application in a broader aspect from when people can design game models.
Yeah, so expected goals is creeping into the game more and more. I don't think it's massively impacting the way a lot of teams play at the very top level. Like the shooting distances in the Premier League are dropping. So on average, teams are shooting from closer in, but shooting less often. But from what I see at college and even MLS to an extent, like that sort of level of the game, like League One, League Two, bottom end of the championship, it's not having a huge influence. Crossing is on the decline, but I'd say it's almost gone too far now. So when I first started working in this field 10 or so years ago, it was kind of open season, right? Everyone was doing what they'd always done, loads of crosses, like that sort of stuff. And then data started coming into the game, and crossing has been reduced an awful lot in the modern game, especially at the top level. But it's getting to the point now where the best defensive teams are defending so narrow because they're okay with you crossing the ball, that teams like Liverpool now and Man City are actually crossing a lot more and scoring a lot of goals from crosses. But it's not crosses like they used to be. It's not kind of like high arching crosses to the back post from the touchline. Because teams are sitting narrower, you're able to get a lot closer to the edge of the box and hit kind of like almost like your typical Man City goal, which is like some sort of positional play, a slip ball down the side and a hard and low cross. And Liverpool are just like that now too. So teams are crossing more, but they're much better, kind of more efficient crosses. And then transition, right? Transition used to be a lot slower, I think. And in the last 3-4 years, partly because of just how a lot of players have developed and teams have been built, but you look at Man City and Liverpool, you use them as the 2 kind of benchmark clubs in England for sure. Like they're absolutely unbelievable in transition. And Mourinho kind of started it a little bit, with being okay without having the ball, and when you've got the ball, you're vulnerable versus us, like that famous quote. But now, so many goals are scored in transition that it's frightening. Like you lose the ball and teams just punish you and kill you straight away. The best teams anyway.
So then let's speak to how, if you're a coach listening and you want to set your team up or your club up, if you're a director of coaching, you obviously referenced earlier that training shouldn't, training sessions would be wasted if they're not kind of replicating or practicing the desired game models. But speak specifically to how you go about designing something that's based upon evidence. What's the process? Is it coaches jot down the assumptions or what you believe to be true about how your teams play? Like if you're crossing versus not crossing, do you know, have you got reasons behind it? Like talk to them about how they can go around A, kind of creating a game model, and then B, what you would advise in terms of making it evidence informed and dispelling maybe some of the myths that might exist.
Yeah, sure. The easiest one first, right? The biggest myth in the world is people say, well, I don't have all this software and equipment, or I don't have, the only thing you really need is a video of a game. And even at that, right, if you really, really are stretched and you don't have videos of your games, you can build a really loose game model and a way of measuring it around having a parent or an injured player, or players taking it in turns on the bench, whatever it is, in order to measure some pretty basic stuff. Just my personality, this was a kind of a story I was going to tell about me and you, Tom, from back in the day. For people that don't know, Tom's actually a really, really good snooker player, like really good. And we went to Leeds Met together a long time ago. And Tom and I used to play snooker. I lived in a pub growing up, and I played a bit of snooker, but nowhere near as much as Tom. And he was unbelievable. We played about 50 games, and I beat him once. I'm like the ultimate pragmatist. So I was like playing a really shitty, slow game, like never trying to take any risks. Like it was Jose Mourinho playing snooker. And that's just my personality. And Shieldsy was like all flamboyant, potting balls left, right, and center, like excellent player. I beat him once just by being like Simeone playing snooker or Mourinho. And that's my personality. So as a coach, I would be very pragmatic. If I was a coach, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't think I would have the first clue about, and I honestly wouldn't have any motivation to start teaching like positional play and breaking lines and all this type of stuff. I think I'd very much be in the kind of, here, Sam Allardyce, Simeone, whoever it is, here's how we're going to win this game, go do it. And I think that's in youth development as well. I mean, I'm not the guy that's going to put the big forward up front to score a bunch of headers at U12s, but someone said to me once at Virginia, well, you weren't developing pros by teaching them to play that way in college soccer and win a national championship. And I just kind of said to them one day, you don't think they're going to go away to a game that they know they're going to get spanked somewhere when they're a professional player and have to learn how to kind of sit in and just do a job? Like that's equally as important about being it depends what you're trying to do, but at some point in your career, whether you're going to be a college player or an adult player playing in a rec league or whatever, at some point you're going to have to do something you don't want to do to try and win a game. And that's the part of the game that's a little bit idealistic, I think, in youth coaching, and people always frown upon youth coaches trying to win games. And I understand that you don't want to try and win games all the time by launch the ball, but I think it's healthy sometimes to teach kids how to win ugly. And because you're going to have to do it if you want to be a pro or you want to be a college player or whatever your ambitions are, anything in life, take football aside of it, you're going to have to sometimes suck it up and do some stuff you don't want to do to get the best result for you. And, sometimes that can mean not going out on a Saturday night and saving some money to pay the bills, but you've learned that lesson a little bit in football. Anyway, so I'm going off on a tangent. But in terms of building a game model, right? Say only thing you have is a video camera. So you don't have data on crossing or passing or anything like that. People say to me sometimes, well, I've got no way of knowing or measuring how many passes we have or how well we pass the ball. And my first point would be, well, like, first of all, don't worry about counting the amount of passes and doing stuff like that. But say you want to be a possession-based team that plays out the back. You don't need to know your centre back's passing percentage or how many times your goalkeeper did whatever, right? You can ask 3 simple questions and pretty much have a really solid idea of how well you played out the back for a game. So first of all, take a goal kick opportunity or the keeper of the ball at his feet. The first question is, did we have the opportunity to play short? Yes, no. Then the next question is, did we play short? Yes, no. And then the third question would be, were we successful? Yes or no. And in answering them 3 questions, you can build how many times you had a chance to play, how many times you chose to play when you had the chance, and your success rate of them. So in just saying, like, we had 10 chances to play short, we took 5 of them straight away, there that 50% of the times you had the chance to play, you chose to. And then after that, were we successful? Say 2 out of your 5 were, okay, now that's 40% success rate. So straight away, if you've measured that 5 games in a row, you can start to see if there's improvements game after game, or if it's dropped off, and whether or not it's time to maybe do a session on playing out the back. And all you have to do is ask yourself really simple questions. You know, you don't have to stop and start the tape. You don't have to do all this stuff. All you have to do is kind of a tally chart on a piece of paper and measure it. And it's the same with attacking, right? I go on about crossing a lot of the time because it's something I'm quite big on. But, you know, the only thing you need to really count is, okay, did we cross the ball? Yes or no? Should we have crossed the ball? Yes or no? Was it successful? That's all you really need to start building some like actual metrics around how we performed. So when you're talking about building a game model, if you want to press high, you can then say, okay, 3 questions again. Was the opportunity there to press? Did we choose to press? Were we successful? And straight away, then you know, okay, 50% of the time that we had the opportunity, we chose to press. Is that better or worse than what our targets are? Or is that better than worse than what we've been doing in previous weeks? And if it's worse, and if it's dropped off, or if it's not going the way you want it to go as a club, then you can choose to take action on that. And that's very, very basic performance analysis using video. But what you're doing is you're starting to gather some, I would call it gathering data, but you probably don't even call it that within a club, you know, but you're only asking a few very simple questions to get some really good actionable results. It's the extra 10% at the professional level where you need like really good location data and passes and individual, you know, you can get 90% of what you need out of analysis just by having a video of a game or a parent in the stand or whatever it is, and having some organization on the front end about knowing what you want to measure and why and how you're going to measure it.
Ollie, when you start to look at the really intentional game models and the rules and strategies and principles that underpin almost every third, every fifth, every segment that a manager wants his players to play through, and the particular patterns of play, there's always a plan B, there's always a plan C. So Edison, plan B is, can I launch a 70-yard pass to Sane on a run because we're being high pressed? There's always a plan B and a plan C, but the plan A, the really intentional, purposeful setup and structure, and then pattern of play that sits within that. I'm a big believer in performance is contextual, and it's contextual to the type of player you have, and more importantly, the level of intelligence that a player you have. So in terms of building out something more intentional, if you have a high level, high functioning DA level team or ECNL team within a club, how would you ask or explain to a coach to go about building something like that a little bit further on to just having a look at a video and starting with those basic questions?
Yeah, it's a good question. It all depends on how much time the coach wants to put into it, right? There's no getting away from the more detailed what it is you want to measure, and the more permutations of that there are, then the more time you're going to have to put into analyzing the game. So the example I gave about 3 questions for playing out the back, obviously that's for someone who wants to measure, did we play out the back well, yes or no, rather than, you know, this is the way we really want to play out the back, and if this happens, then we've got option B, like you talked about. With that scenario, like you talk about, like a high level, like very detail oriented team, you're going to have to put more work in, but arguably you're going to get more out on the back end. But I think the principles remain the same, right? So it's almost like a flow chart. You know, like you see organizational charts, and it's like a yes, no, and you eventually get to the answer. It's the same here. So the keeper's got the ball at the back, and our number 1 priority is give it to the right centre back because he's the best on the ball. This is how we want to move it. So that's your first question, is like, is it possible to play this pass that we want to play? And then once he's got the ball, option A is the one we want to do. Did it happen? Yes, no, and if no, why? And if yes, then great. You know, you kind of go down and you just make it more detailed. But not the argument, but the theory remains the same, that essentially if you're organized on the front end and you just know how you're going to measure it or what you want to measure, you can get almost anything out of it. You just have to be aware that the more detailed and kind of pedantic you're going to be about what, you know, how you want to do things, means that it's going to create you more work on the back end. But we work with some that used to be the development academy, some of the development academy teams who've got a really overly specific game model, I feel like at times, and I don't disagree that that's, like, I don't think it's a bad thing to have, but I think structuring the kids too much at that age, especially if they're going to go to somewhere that isn't. So if you're in the Red Bull Academy or the Dallas Academy or something, you know, there's a valid argument that, yeah, we need them to do this because we're developing them to be this player for this club. But if you're at a non-MLS affiliated academy, or even like a lower level academy, and you know, to be quite honest, the future for this kid is going to be college soccer and then maybe the draft or whatever, like, I think pigeonholing them into a certain pattern of play every single time you play and stuff, it's healthy to an extent, in, like I talked about, teaching them how to do what a coach needs them to do to win a game or to develop. But if you're giving them that this is your only option every time you get the ball, like, they're going to be a very limited player in the, you know, on the back end of it. I'm sure you've experienced in your time. Like, same with a striker, right? If you want him to run behind and just kind of be a constant threat on the back shoulder, like, as long as he plays for a club in his career that always needs him to do that, that's fine. But if you stick him 10 years later at the age of 25 in a professional team that needs him to hold the ball up, he's just going to have no ability to do that. So in my opinion, like, it's very important to make sure that you kind of round in the youth players with stuff like that. But yeah, there's ways to measure the very specific movements and ways of doing it. But again, it's just how much time do you want to put into it on the front end, really.
Last point, how many teams have you been around where the players, and this can be at a professional level, one, understood what their game model was, and two, understood their teammates' roles and responsibilities within the game model? Because no matter where I look at the moment, and fortunate to have some really experienced mentors, there still seems to be, even at the highest level, if you went in and asked a professional player, what's our game model, they would probably say, well, we play 4-3-3. And my role,
Yeah,
I'm a holding midfielder. That would be the extent of it. And I think that might be the evolution of where the game could go next.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you talk about everybody being on the same page, I think it's a lot rarer than people give a lot of coaches credit for. You know, a lot of the time they think good teams are like unbelievably well, you know, everyone understanding each other's role. They might just be a good team, you know, but in my experience, we've had the team at Virginia was probably as close to that as I would have experienced. And then we had a very good year in Wilmer Cabrera's first year at the Dynamo. We basically decided to sit deep and counterattack and bunker. And, you know, a lot of players had a very good understanding, a clear understanding of what their roles and expectations were. But like you said, I think it's very rare, and I think it's a lot rarer. So because we're in North America, you know, you look at it, I think Jesse Marsh's New York Red Bull team were probably the best ever organized team in terms of everybody being on the same page. You know, Greg Berhalter's Columbus Crew team were very similar, you know, like completely opposite styles, right? Jesse Marsh was high pressing, high intensity, short passing, loads of turnovers, good and bad, just like mayhem, but they controlled the mayhem. Whereas Columbus were very slow, methodical, build-up play, you know, overloads in wide areas, completely opposite game models, but both like completely on the same page. And both coaches got loads more out of their players, like in terms of dollars spent and salary cap, than anybody else. But I think it's rare. I even in the Premier League now, you look at it, right? I have to say it because I'm a Sheffield United fan. You look at Chris Wilder's Sheffield United, you look at Liverpool, maybe not even this year as much Man City, but like, you know, you're not telling me that even 15 teams in the Premier League have all got a great understanding of exactly what is expected of them. Like, no chance.
Well, I want to build on that in a second. I just want to loop it back to the conversation, Mark, before we loop this way, was how you could potentially, at least in youth clubs, leverage the support of injured players or parents to help support you attain data, right? So when you were saying, people say, oh, I can't do it because I don't have X or Y, I would challenge all the coaches on the line to eliminate those excuses wherever they possibly can. Right? Anybody can sit on the sideline. If you've got an injured player on a bench that can, you know, just tally chart, right? The old notational analysis, tally chart, you know, when this happened or when this happened, or a parent could do it. Maybe there's some opportunities there for the coaches to try and do some parent and player education so that they understand a little bit more about what's trying to be achieved. So I would challenge you guys, you know, don't hide behind, we don't have a nice fancy video and huddle or somebody to break down the data for us. Try to kind of use the resources that you do have. Now, just then on the game model conversation, how important is it, Ollie, for coaches, once they've come up with the game model, so you compared Jesse Marsh to Greg Beerhalter, how important is it to know what your strengths and weaknesses are? Because if you're going to commit to something, you know, yes, we need to, this is why we're going to do it, but ultimately against a contradictory style or somebody, like, is it just knowing the strengths, or is it about knowing where you're vulnerable as well and adjusting so you've got a plan B, or how do team KPIs work into the defensive side of the game as well? Because I think often game models are spoken about, we look at in possession, the team do this. Well, what about off the ball? Because, you know, I'm vulnerable here because of how I set up here. Like, how important?
No, it's a perfectly valid point. You know, I think the best example of that, again, in my time that I've seen firsthand, was at Virginia, right? We built some KPIs around when we didn't have the ball. So we basically, because we had passing stats, I could measure how many times per pass this happened, but we looked at coding or recording any moment where we thought the team was in like disorganized shape, we call it. So the rules were it had to be 5 seconds after a turnover. So it couldn't be when the ball immediately got turned over, because generally when you lose the ball, you are out of shape. But within 5 seconds of a turnover, were we at any point out of shape until we won the ball back? And it was completely subjective coding. So we didn't define what good shape was in terms of this player has to be 10 yards away from this player or anything like that. But it was coach's opinion. Are we in like good defensive shape right now? And if it was more than 5 seconds from a turnover, you'd be kind of in that period where you could say, yes, you were out of shape. And we basically used to say, okay, this game, there was 7 moments we thought when defensively we were out of shape. The opposition had 500 passes. So that's, you know, then you've got a number right there for however many that is. I'll say 10 moments. It makes it easier for me. That's 50 passes. So every 50 passes, we were out of shape once, you know, and then the next game you go again. And this time it was only every 35 passes or whatever. So it was a better defensive performance. So it's still a coach's opinion in terms of we're out of shape right now, but you're actually producing like objective data almost on it, which is, well, compared to what the exact same thing we were measuring last week, we were in better defensive shape or worse defensive shape. So the defensive moments of the game are generally a bit harder to kind of quantify and to code like that. But again, they're not impossible. It's just about kind of thinking a bit creatively about how can we kind of generate objective information, even though it might be a subjective thing we're trying to measure. So same we had one centre back that we thought got kind of basically got caught square too often in transition. He was kind of facing up the field instead of sideways on. And this was more tied into individual development, but we looked at, again, transitional moments and how many of the opposition's transitions where we thought if a pass is played right now, could you have been caught square, you know? And again, we started working with a player on that. It's a subjective thing to code, but after 5 games or whatever, you've kind of got some objective data on that as well. So, and that's got nothing to do with having huddle, like you said, or anything like that. It's all about just knowing how you're going to measure it on the front end.
No, look, it's fascinating, mate, and I just think it's, you know, for me, the whole purpose of conversations like this is to challenge coaches' assumptions of, you know, okay, this is what I expect to see. Is it always what happens? You know, have I thought about this? Have I been able to adjust or adapt in this situation? Do I know what I'd like to do in, you know, if this happens? So I just think it's so insightful, mate, and so appreciated. We are at an hour of the conversation. before I just turn it to any of the chats and see if people have got anything specific that they'd like to close with. Firstly, thank you obviously so much for sharing the insight and the education that you have. Let's talk about CoachTech for a minute. You know, where can people go? How can people find you if this has sparked a bit of an interest? How can they learn more from you and, you know, talk to us about the website? And
thanks for the plug. I do appreciate it. Not just doing it for that, I promise. I'm good friends with Tom and I'm kind of bored at home, so it's always good to give back when possible. Yeah, I run a side business or an analysis-based business called CoachTech. If you find me on Twitter, it's on my timeline. It's always a couple tweets from the top at least. CoachTech Soccer. Essentially, I had a lot of people when I was at Houston reaching out, asking how they can get into analysis, what they can do. There doesn't seem to be any courses out there for it. Definitely on traditional coaching courses, you know, generally the game analysis module is here's a half of a game of football, split into groups and talk about how they play. And it's, in my opinion, it's got nothing to do with how you would actually analyze a game if you're a professional head coach or a head coach of any nature. You know, you're just describing what happened really. So I built an online course on evidence-based coaching, essentially it was called, which is teaching people from start to finish how to build a game model, how you might go about measuring that, how you then tie their insights into your training, and how you make it basically impact your behavior as a coach. So if you'd like to check it out, feel free to shoot me a direct message, anything you want on Twitter. I just released a new course on, it's called Modern Attacking Play, which breaks down some of the stuff I was talking about. It looks at why Liverpool and Man City are better than everybody else, basically, and why Aguero scores more goals than everybody else. So there's a lot of resources there. I wrote an article probably about a year ago now about Jesse Marsh. I mentioned him as probably the best, kind of most reinforced, well-organized game model I'd ever seen, definitely in MLS. There's a great video of him describing that and showing how it ties in from the youth academy all the way up to the first team with video examples. I'm good friends with the analysts there, Ewan Sharp. We actually went to college together in America when I came out here. So it's like an all-in-one article of Jesse describing the game model, and analysts talking about how they reinforce it, and then some video and data to show how they actually played that way too. I'll post that on my Twitter shortly following this webinar.
Perfect, thanks all. Couple of comments that have come through just to say, obviously that people have already checked out the course and are grateful for the content, and I can speak firsthand to how insightful it is, and yeah, can't really recommend it highly enough. So if you're looking for extra stuff to do during lockdown, I would strongly encourage people to go there just to broaden their understanding really and appreciation of a very different side of the game, but one that's hugely important as we move forward. So I'll be very mindful of your time, and I know Mark, you and I have got to run. So I guess all that's left to say, all is on behalf of myself, Willow, all of Team Beyond Pulse, everybody that's listening now, everybody that listens in the future. Thank you for the insight, mate. It was top class. I'm sure there's pages of scribbles down from everybody, and we will certainly get our cliff notes done just to post when we do a full review of this, and obviously the webinar has been recorded and will be shared again later on this evening. Full recording will be accessible to all. So Ollie, thank you ever so much. Tomorrow, boys, girls on the line, we're joined by Tony Faulkner of VSI Executive Education. So a really insightful conversation that's forthcoming just about the evolution of coaches and players as they exit playing careers at the highest level, and looking at sports directorship, and a really novel appreciation for sports management, business, and the need to be, I guess, multifaceted as coaches at the elite end of performance in today's game. So that one will be 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon as well, East Coast time, 6 p.m. GMT. So Ollie, thank you ever so much, bud. Really appreciate it. And like we said, everybody, check out CoachTech Soccer online.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.